Welcome to week 7. Last week in week 6, you had 3 little assignments, and I'm going to use the essay, A is for absent, is sort of my example as I open up week 7. So by the end of last week, you'll have completed your virtual assignment wherein you worked on that little essay, A is for absent. You posted your main article citation at Discussion Board Forum. So by now, all of you should know what article you're analyzing rhetorically. And then you completed a little kind of fun little assignment at the discussion board looking at the rhetorical appeals of a print ad or a video ad. So in week 7, we're going to continue our work on understanding rhetorical situation and rhetorical appeals, but we're really going to push into our own main article this week. So before we look at the virtual assignment, which is due on Tuesday, March 14th, I want to do a little recap of the idea of rhetorical analysis. And to do that, I'm probably going to refer back to that A is absent essay a few times. So be aware of that. So let me go ahead and call up this little PDF file that I have. Okay, so rhetorical analysis. I want to go back and I want to talk about the terms rhetorical and analysis and break them down one more time for y'all. So rhetorical means that which relates to rhetoric. And if you remember from week 6, we learned that rhetoric is the ability in a particular case to identify the means of persuasion, and that in a particular case is really what's important, because that is what really focuses in on the audience and the situation. So audience, when you're talking about rhetoric and persuasion, audience is the key to everything. And I want you all to keep that in mind as you are working on your main article. And we'll talk about that in terms of the A is for absent essay as we go along in this little presentation. So just kind of hold in the back of your mind that idea of particular case or audience. All right, so now analysis, we know, is to break something into its pieces in order to examine and to understand. So putting that together, rhetorical analysis is examining persuasive language to gain a better understanding in order to make a judgment of the work. So you are making a judgment on your main article. What you're going to judge, what you're going to determine is, was your author effective or not effective in using persuasive language? So what you're not doing is looking at the subject matter. And I really want to emphasize that for you all, that you are examining how those authors use persuasive language to convince the audience, that specific audience, of that thesis. All right. In order to really understand rhetorical analysis, we first have to identify the argument. So let's go ahead and define argument. So I have several bullet points here. So an argument always deals with topics, ideas, and issues that haven't yet been settled. If we refer back to our A is for absent essay, if you remember, the topic, the issue that the author was addressing had to do with attendance in a college class. So an argument always has 2 or more viewpoints. Well, that was true for the A is for absent essay. We had the student's viewpoint, the student author, and we had the opposing viewpoint, which would have been the professor's viewpoint. It's subject to question. So clearly that particular issue of attendance in class, the student felt it was subject to question. And an argument makes a claim, often dealing with what we ought or should do about something. So in the case of A is for absent, the student author was claiming that attendance is irrelevant when it comes to doing well in a college class. All right. So your job in this particular assignment is you're going to be assessing how that argument is made. So how can you assess an argument? So the first thing you have to do is understand that rhetorical situation surrounding the argument. Without understanding these elements, you cannot make any judgments. So let's get to that rhetorical situation. There are 5 components to a rhetorical situation. The first is the text. So what is the text? That's the first thing you're going to ask yourself. So in the case of A is for absent, we say, well, what was this? Obviously it was an essay, but if you read more carefully, what you learned was that it was an essay written by a student for a student newspaper, a university student newspaper. It was University of Texas, okay? In the case of your main article that you chose, your text is a journal article, a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article, all right? Now, second element in the rhetorical situation, the author, who created the text. So when we looked at our A is for absent, there was a name, but that's not really what we're concerned with. What we're really concerned with is who is this particular author. So for A is for absent, this particular author was a student. In fact, he was a sophomore in college at the University of Texas who appeared to be a communications major. All of that's important to know about that author because it tells you something about that particular author's credibility and authority. So in the case of your scholarly journal articles, you need to go and ask yourself, who are these people? There are names. There's probably a list of names. Why are they authorities on this topic? And how am I going to learn about them? When you did your annotated bibliography, you would have started to identify the credibility of those particular authors. So you kind of already have some of this information. If you go back and review your annotation, you should have some of this. All right. Third element, purpose. What is this text hoping to do? So this is usually tied up with the thesis of a particular text. In the case of A is for absent, the purpose, that's a good question. What was that author trying to do? My answer for that is that the author was trying to sort of build a coalition of students or get the students riled up about attendance to maybe do a petition, maybe just air some grievances. The purpose is sort of, for that particular situation, you sort of have to draw some inferences. And again, trying to get the student body excited about that topic. In the case of your journal articles, you have to look at the thesis. You have to look and see why these particular authors chose to write this article. What are they doing? Are they trying to reveal information? Are they trying to change public policy? Are they trying to get a new kind of medical treatment put forward? So that's something that you're going to have to think about for your particular article. And you'll be doing that this week. Now, audience, who is the text for? And this is really key to understanding how effective your article is, how effective your authors are in persuading the readers. So in the case of A is for absent, Because it was published in a student newspaper, I'm going to say that the audience is a group of college students. In the case of your peer-reviewed article, you ask yourself, where is this article published? Who would be reading this journal? So who is this written for? It's probably not written for the average person. Most journals are not available on a newsstand. Most journals they're expensive. They're very specific. So for most of you, your audience for your journal article is going to be a very specific group of people within that discipline. And then finally, the fifth element of the rhetorical situation is context. So when and where was this text published? And this sort of links back to, the audience. Again, all of these 5 elements, I'm going to weave my little cursor around, they're all connected. They really are all connected. You ask yourself, when was this published? Where was it published? What was going on in the world? All right. So again, all 5 of these parts work together in order to create a rhetorical situation. And you need to examine them all to begin to understand the effectiveness of that particular article. All right. So the way that authors try to achieve persuasion is by using certain rhetorical appeals. So they make intentional choices about language to appeal to certain faculties of the reader. These choices are governed by an understanding, again, of this rhetorical situation. So I know this about my audience, therefore, I'm going to choose certain language in order to convince them. So let's move on. The language of rhetoric. Once we understand rhetorical situation, we can begin to pick apart that language and say, how does it work to persuade? And here are our rhetorical appeals. And you started working with these last week: ethos, logos, and pathos. To recap, ethos, credibility, reliability, trustworthiness, character, and ethics. Believe me, identify with me, because I'm the kind of person I am. So in A is for Absent, the author used ethos quite heavily. The author said, hey, I'm a good student. I am a college student. I'm only a sophomore, but I'm taking this really hard class. The student tried to identify himself as making good grades. So the student definitely used ethos in that essay. So our next appeal, logos. So this would be evidence, data, research, and logic. Believe me, because what I say is reasonable. So that particular student tried to do a couple of things. They tried to use logic to show that the professor's argument about comparing going to class and being paid, going to class being like going to a job, was not a correct argument. And the student also tried to make the comparison with ACT testing. So there was evidence and logic that the student was using. Now, I will say that the student, if you really dig deep, used flawed or false evidence, because the student made a claim within that argument that the student pays the professor rather than the professor paying the student. Well, it's true that the professor doesn't pay the student, but it is not true that a student pays a professor. That's not actually factual. So that would make me, as a reader, go back and question the ethos of that author. But that's what the student was trying to do. And then the final appeal is pathos. And this is feelings, desires, attitudes, values, and emotions. Believe me, because X feels good or bad or makes me angry. And that student in A is for Absent definitely used appeal to pathos. Tried to get students worked up and maybe angry. That's the sense that the student was going for. Now, for y'all's essays, you're going to be, your journal articles, I should say, you're going to be applying these rhetorical appeals. And that's what we're going to work on this week. That's one of the things we're going to work on this week is how does ethos, logos, and pathos get used in a scholarly journal article. All right, so be sure to watch the next video when I get into the work for the week.